Rise, renew, reconnect. Welcome to From the Ashes, a podcast where every story ignites hope and healing. My awesome guest today is Katherine Roesler, a sober artist and creative who believes that we are all artists, that play is essential, and that creation in any form is valuable, transformative, and healing. We met at an online community building event for creatives and immediately hit it off with some deep discussions about what it means to be an artist, how to build community, and how to heal from our deeper inner blocks. What I love about today's episode is that it is a conversation where we both bump up against the unknown, against our personal limiting beliefs, and rather than avoid the discomfort, we used our discourse to explore some of the core issues facing our generation in a world set up to keep us lonely, jaded, and distracted. After you finish this episode, our request to you is that you connect with us and let us know how we can help you rediscover your community.
And the fire in the darkest night, the phoenix burns. It's ready for flight. Shadows may come, try to tear you apart, but you're the flame that
All right, everyone, welcome back to From the Ashes. I have my guest, Katherine Roesler, here with me today. She's from the Toronto area, and we are going to create this podcast episode kind of like a piece of art. We're going to riff, we're going to talk about community, healing, and art. So, first off, welcome, Katherine, to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. I love that you said we're going to create this podcast like a piece of art. That's really fun.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what comes up, what we create together, because the conversation that we've had previously, I think it was just so fruitful. And the way that you think about art, it's just so effective for getting us to dig deeper about things. And
Mm.
so obviously you have a story behind that, right? So tell the audience a little bit about yourself and share the origins of how you've become the artist that you are today.
Yeah, so I think like if I'm speaking from the art lens, my joy from art came. I remember in kindergarten, it was like at the cut and paste table. It was a table that we had where you had like all different sorts of leftover materials like ribbons and tissue boxes, and you would just go and like glue things together, and I would come home and I would have like show my mom like, this is a camera, this is a rocket ship. And I just have a really vivid memory of being there and having the freedom to create without, like, in art class where it goes, okay, we're gonna make this today. And that became very structured. So I have such a deep connection to like the freedom that of that memory. My parents also met kind of in art class and art school and university, so their art is, like, around my house. So I always kind of, as a kid, was like, "Why are you guys not artists? Like, what's going on? Like, that is the coolest job in the world. Why aren't you doing that?" And it wasn't until later when I realized, okay, like, it's actually really difficult to be a full-time artist, to follow that dream, because money comes in and internal criticism comes in, and, like, those are a lot of blocks that, like, block you from owning it blocked me personally from, like, owning the title of artist. In university, I really struggled with the idea of, like, when I realized, like, money and, like, commercialization was coming into my art practice because I was studying sociology at the same time. I was learning about, like, like, how humans are destroying the environment and how, like, there's landfills of, like, fabric across the world. I'm like, "So why should I make more stuff to exist?" And I battled with that a little bit. So I eventually, like, I would go in and out of, I'd be like, "Should I do the art program?" And then I'd go into sociology, so I didn't fully commit to my original application into, like, studio art. And also during that time, I was really throughout my teen years and in university, I was really struggling with substance abuse. I, like, fell into it at an early age, like 14, and me and the boyfriend I had in high school, that's what a lot of our relationship revolved around, and it definitely disconnected me from myself in a lot of ways, and didn't really completely come back to my desire of, like, "Hey, no, like, I wanna be an artist, like, I am an artist," until 2017. I graduated university, I had, like, traveled a bit, I had had another kind of, like, bender. As much as it was fun, the lows were so low. Like was so depressed, suicidal, like just I couldn't stop this cycle from happening. And in 2017, like I came home, I didn't have a job, decided to like shave my head and was like I need to stop. Like I need to let go of this and change. And in 2017 is when I started to like draw again, and I started to just draw from that space of like a childlike state of mind, from that space that I knew from kindergarten. Instead of all the art classes that I took over the years, it was a lot more free and just like letting me process my emotions, and like from this creative space that wasn't bound by the ideas that what it meant to be an artist. It was just whatever I was creating was an artist. Yeah, was me being an artist. And around that same time, I had a part-time job at as a cashier at Whole Foods, and a lot of the people I worked with were also artists. And one guy I met, I actually reconnected with a couple years ago, but he's like, "Oh, you just have to call yourself an artist. Just, just declare it." And I finally it took me years, and even still I ponder with this, I'm an artist. But I decided, I was like, "Okay, like I'm declaring to myself in that moment, like I am an artist." And it was kind of the same story of when I was getting sober. Like it didn't just happen one day. It was like a continual process of deciding again and again and again. Like I was kind of being like, I'm sober, like I'm sober and I'm choosing this. I also had to be like, I'm an
Mm.
artist. I'm an artist. And it was like a continual like it wasn't yeah, it's not like this you just once you say it and you believe it. It was a ongoing and a continually ongoing affirmation of self. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I love that. And so much of what you said is very relatable. And I love this idea of that you're choosing to be the artist and you're
Mm.
choosing yourself because I had the same journey. There's a lot of shame, I think, that comes from trying to be an artist and not quote unquote making it,
Oh,
right?
oh my gosh.
And like, and then you have that negative self-talk of like, how dare I call myself an artist? But it's the artist precedes the validation, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. But that's so difficult in a world where the monetary value is often put first.
Yeah, totally. It's it's interesting that we aren't able to step into that. And it's also I feel like it's such a common struggle of artists. Like the struggling artist is like the narrative that,
Mhm.
you're never gonna make it. And I mean, at certain people, maybe at one point in time that was true, but I even think like, no, like artists have always been present, maybe just in different contexts and different ways. But it is like this narrative that's been given to us. And I wonder, I'm like, where does this come from? Like, where have we learned this narrative? Part of I think what comes up for me immediately is like, we're told like in a lot of I don't know if it's in school or certain parents and generations, it's kind of
Mhm.
like, no, it's not a successful path.
Yeah.
And the success meaning money, which is true. Like we do need money to survive and thrive. But also the idea that like in a lot of like spaces, the arts and culture has been like taken away, which is I think where like, the community comes in. It's like I know I've heard this narrative come up in different places, but like, maybe a building or a residential area is built. Like, I live in the suburbs, but it's not built with like the community and like arts in mind. It's just built with efficiency and success and production, but it forgets about like our humanity.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's somehow wrapped up in that like cultural story.
Yes. So there are a couple of points there I want to discuss with you. One that you said is this idea of this starving artist thing being put on artists. So recently, after having wrapped up a project where I was around a lot of dancers that make art as a living or partial living, is that those who are doing it they might not be like making the most money,
Mm.
but they've accepted and embraced the reality because their art fulfills them, right? And externally, it might be that they will never have a mortgage, or they might never like be able to afford certain luxuries that, people who choose like a 9 to 5 would. But does that mean that they're lacking or that they're not wealthy? And I really want to question that, because there are a lot of people who make tons more money that feel like they're a slave to society, and that they feel they're very trapped, and they don't have self-expression.
Mhm.
And so, I don't know, there is kind of this objective reality that, yeah, we are quote unquote sacrificing, but we are sacrificing by making our self-expression sacred.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean that we are destined to have a life of poverty. At least I don't think so. But I think in order for us to go beyond scarcity, we need to overcome this paradigm of like we are lacking.
Yeah. I definitely think it's something to overcome. And I think, like, maybe that first step is kind of, yeah, like, accepting that maybe this is part of the reality. And then also, I feel like part of it is also stepping into the realization, like, I feel like they both truly can exist together. Like, I feel like you can be a successful artist and, like, in both the fulfillment and richness in, like, in that sacrifice, but also in living a life where you aren't maybe worried about, okay, where's the next paycheck gonna come from? But you probably can't reach that point until you, like, move through that blockage of, like, starving artist. You need
Yeah.
to accept it first to, like, then come out on the other side of that narrative.
Yes, and I think this is kind of the paradox of what we would think of as like abundance mindset, or even just like manifestation, is that if
Mm.
you in the back of your mind are telling yourself that you doubt the possibility,
Mhm.
the doubt is going to overtake your possibility.
Mhm. 'Cause, yeah, doubt then is what is you are making that your possibility. It's whatever, yeah, that limiting belief becomes what you manifest.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's set that aside for a second, because there was another thing that you said about your journey as an artist that I think is very, and it's just significant for a lot of people who do decide to be artists or choose to be artists. And it's this idea of freedom, right? Being in the kindergarten room and having the freedom to just like do whatever, and having your art reflects your potential, like what you're feeling, et cetera, et cetera. And then having kind of like, as we start to build on that, like having kind of these constructs of confinement that like take us away from that true freedom. And so, and the same goes for my journey as a dancer too. Like I used to just like do whatever I want in the living room, perform for my parents, right? And then like learning technique, like the technique of jazz or the technique of hip hop and the technique of popping and locking, which is all great because I learned a lot of culture through that too. But then realizing that like as a unique individual, I don't think that the power of being an artist is just to emulate one style or one technique. The power of the artist is to find the freedom by honing and taking in technique so that like whatever comes out becomes more powerful. So what do you think of that? And like how have you been able to tap back into your freedom as
Mhm.
you've grown as an artist?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that I think that's really interesting, and I can relate too, because, like, I did ballet and I danced a lot growing up, and I see it, it's almost like in the creative and art space, it's like it's a cookie cutter that could fit in whatever realm that you partake in, and it's almost like when I think back to, like, the structure that comes with technique, there's definitely a lot of value in that. Like, you can learn so many different skills or things that you didn't know existed. You can learn, like, history and culture and all those things that are really valuable. I think what maybe there's another part there of are you meeting, or like how well do you master that technique? And if you don't master it, then you are not then good enough. Or like this idea, like if you aren't perfect at this, and that probably is a bit of both the outward narrative of a teacher or some, getting a grade, whether that be in a whatever exam you're taking or a test, or, an art class, you get like a B instead of an A. And so having that like external critique, and then also applying your self-worth to that critique. And I
Mm.
think that's like where you apply your self-worth, because as an artist, like in the freedom self-expression, it's like, well, there is nothing to mark or critique, because it is just what it is. Like it is in its pure form, and it can't, or I don't think it should be judged. It is just there to exist. But when we add that, like, refinement and critique, which can be argued is helpful in many ways, but it can also be harmful when you feel like you're your art, and then somebody's like, "Oh, well, it's not good enough." And then it makes you think, "Oh, I'm not good enough because you said my art isn't good enough." And they almost go hand in hand. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's where I felt. And like all in dance, I never felt good enough. I never felt good. I still struggle with those thoughts. But now I think it's in recognizing that it's not a fact, and kind of reaffirming like, "Oh, that's not true." And like seeing when those subconscious like programming returns, but you have to remind yourself like, "Oh, that's not true. Like I don't align with that. I don't believe that," even though you might be saying it to yourself and thinking it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I forget what the other part of your question was. I don't know if that answered it.
I think that answered it. I think I'll reflect back on what you just said, because I think when now that I've grown as an artist, that I really value authenticity. And like when I want to create, or when I want to connect with somebody's art, I'm no longer looking for a skill or looking for ways to critique it, because I just feel like, well, that's not like, I just get to feel better about myself, I guess, if I sit there as a critic. But what if I sat there as just a mirror? Or what if I sat there looking for that person's humanity, right? Like, then my experience of the art is going to be completely different. And then I get to understand that person more. And it's like those are two completely different mindsets of
Mhm.
how we consume art, right? And we can't control the way that other people consume art. We can really only control what we put out.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, we can't control what others are think we can only control what we do and what we think and how we choose to exist. And I think it's interesting too, like how maybe, because sometimes I definitely notice myself, the critique part of my mind will come in, or that like more let's just embrace for whatever it is. And probably depending on the environment and context. Like I know I went to Art Basel Miami
mm,
3 years ago, and that it was insane. Like it was so much visual art all day, every day. Like it was as if I was experiencing, like, all of the art images I've ever seen all at once, like, from every gallery, Instagram, Pinterest, like, it was just so much, and I started to notice, like, at first, I was like, "Wow, this is so cool," and then over time, I started to be like, "Wait, I actually don't like that, but I do like this. No, I don't like that," and I felt exhausted from trying to just, like, see it all. Like, it was overwhelming. I don't know if I would return because
yeah,
of the intensity, but I do find it interesting how I can see, like, I'll see sometimes in myself that critique come and go, and I also don't know if it's always a is it like I don't maybe there isn't a good or a bad, it is
right.
just sometimes it is, but maybe it's in like, in what moments in our like, especially in our youth, like, our brains are developing the most in like the first 7 years. So if you have that critique at maybe certain pivotal points, that is when it can be more harmful, when you're still creating that narrative of self. Because I do like, of course, like we're not gonna like every piece of art, or
Yeah.
every creation, but maybe that point of critique, or even like how to learn how to deal with the critique of being an artist. I think I definitely see this conversation a lot now online with friends, or like just like if you're a content creator and you get like, if you're anybody on the internet and you get mean comments, like
Yeah.
that is like a form of critique. It's people just, it has nothing to do with you. It is all to do with the person saying it. But like learning how do we build those skills to be like, okay, that's not for me. Like that's you. Like my art is whole in it. It's just not for you. Like
Yeah.
if you don't like it, then that's okay. It just wasn't meant. Yeah, wasn't meant for you to connect with.
Yes. So
Mhm.
let's talk about that, right? And art and community. Because at the end of the day, we are artists that want to connect.
Mhm.
And I've been thinking about this too. It's like I can dance by myself, but there's an emptiness to it.
Mhm.
I think like at some point I'm looking for an exchange,
Mhm.
and people can consume my art. They can watch me on stage, but that's different, right? A community is one where there's discourse. At least that's my take on it right now.
Mhm.
And, you know, since we had such a great discussion on community before, why do you feel like the concept of community is so important? What does that mean to you, and what does that mean for your art?
Yeah. So I think the concept of community I've come to again over and over the years. And I think it almost like in my mind, I see it as maybe a spectrum, or like a mind map of like community over here and like individualism. So it may be a scale. And I remember when I was first like really struggling with my own mental health, or when I was, if this was years ago, but I read, I think it was a book called Lost Connections. And in the book, the author talks about how we should be healing our mental health and sickness and like addiction. And in the book, there was like a couple examples. One example that really stood out to me was like there was a group of people that were all struggling with their mental health, and they're they were assigned to build a community garden together, and like they were to participate in like the creation and the maintenance as like a group of people. And like over time, this was like the tool to alleviate them from like their illness. And another story was like, I forget what country was in, but like there was a farmer and he lost his crops for the season. And so his like community bought him a cow so then he could sell milk. It was this like learning that I had. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. When, the healing that I was doing, it was like you go to the doctors and it was very like, here's the medicine, or like go to therapy. So it was one on one, or like this pill to fix you. And over the years, I kind of was like, I've come more and more into like this realization. I was like, like, there's something missing. Like, I don't think that's it, but these are the only tools that I have. So I'm going to use them because I need support. I'm not saying that they aren't useful, but I think what was missing was that community aspect. And then more recently, like had, funny enough, so when I was in Miami, I actually had COVID. And since then I've had long COVID. So I've had symptoms that have lingered since I had the infection. And so it really forced me again to like, it was like the universe forced me to be like, okay, you need to slow down. You need to like take care of yourself and your health instead of grinding to, become this artist or successful person that you imagine. And I started learning about like the nervous system. And one key factor in that I learned is like we heal, like your nervous system regulates by like observing other humans, and like you regulate your nervous system with touch and all this stuff. And like it's almost like it's like, of course, like this makes so much sense. But I didn't really ever have the physical understanding. Like it came to me of like, oh, this is really what's missing. Like, this is why there's so much loneliness and depression and addiction and overconsumption, not just on the like individually and collectively. Like we are very disconnected from other people, and we're kind of a bit self-absorbed, and I do it. I still notice it in myself how my subconscious I fall towards that space. So understanding that, as well as like even in my own art practice, seeing I'm like, okay, there is I'm not I would be lying if I didn't say there wasn't part of me that still wishes to be like, I'm like, I want to be a famous artist and make millions of dollars and like just be like a name. Like I'd love to be the next, you know, like, Georgia O'Keeffe or Yayo Kusuma. Like I love those artists, but at the same time I was like, but I'd be lying if I didn't care about sustainability and community, and like I have to include that in order for my art to still be really authentic. So I that's where I've been drawn towards. And I think like in university, my struggle was like, should I even make art? But now it's like, well, like I think a lot about like painting, for example, like acrylic paint. Like it's plastic, right? So I remember in when I was a kid, you'd like put it down the drain. But now I'm like, wait, but that is connected. Like thinking of, I think sometimes community, I also include like people, but nature and the environment. So seeing like pouring plastic, like this plastic paint down the drain probably isn't good for the earth. Like, so now I like have like a closed loop system of how I keep paint water that is, plastic. So I've started to really be like, okay, well, I know like I am an artist, and maybe part of me does want to, be known for the art that I create, but I also have to talk about the community piece because like I can't ignore it. It's like, you like realize it, you find out about it, and then it's like, oh, okay, I have to listen to this now. I have to learn more. I have to connect with it. Because I saw in myself, I'm like, oh, I know I'm happier when I'm in community. I'm
Yeah.
happier when I'm talking and with others, and I'm inspired by others. Like nothing really happens in isolation. So I think it's like this calling that I've been having for a while, and knowing that it is something I need to listen to, but also still struggling with like my old programming and like
Yeah.
overcoming that of being like this so it's kind of like what I said before of like, I'm an artist, I want to be sober. It's like, no, I want to be a community artist now, and I'm having to like retrain my brain to like fit what a community brain is, even though I'm still not 100% sure how to do it. If that makes sense. That was a long-winded story, but yeah.
I mean, it does make sense because the intention is different
Yeah,
and
the
it's
intent.
not mutually exclusive, right? I think that we can traverse many different worlds, but I definitely can see like there are different reasons for why we would do art, and community is definitely one of them.
Mhm. Yeah.
How do you see that manifesting for yourself? Like, how do you engage community with your art rather than just creating the art, right? Because that's one aspect of it
Mhm.
is like how do you see yourself sharing it in a way that is impactful in the way that
Mm.
you want it to be?
Yeah, I think kind of in the way that we've like another form of how we've learned in society, like we've learned a lot of like, this is math and this is science and this is art, this is visual art. I'm starting to see how, even though like I've thought I was like following this path of visual art, I'm seeing like, I think it involves like, once you start involving more people on a single project, it kind of, I don't know if it is just visual art anymore. I think it comes a bit of theater as well, or a bit of something else I think is also needed, because it's not just an individual thing, like it's a collective thing. So, for example, like one idea I've been playing around with was like just making like large puppets that you would puppeteer with like multiple people, and that, like if it's a paper mache head, it's like multiple people can be working on this bigger sculpture. Or they're like, I don't know, maybe you do a community mural, but instead of, everybody doing your own thing, like everybody deciding, okay, this is the colors we're going to use, and this is, like having, I guess, a stay in that creation. And I'm still trying to figure that out, because I think sometimes still because I would want, I think in community, it's like everybody needs to have a say in the creation process, but also there still needs to be, I think, some form of like guidance and leadership or, collaboration. And it's still something that I'm working on and figuring out as I go. I think I think in theory, it's can be really easy to talk about, but when putting into practice, putting into play, I find I find maybe I'm sometimes a little intimidated, or I that second guessing of like, "Oh, is this gonna go right, or what could go wrong?" Instead of just being like, well, with the thinking of play, it's like, no, you just have to do it and see what happens, because you don't know until it's in the process.
Yeah. I think there's room for experimentation.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't
I
know
think
what exactly is going to work until it does work
yeah.
sometimes. One of the things that I comes to my mind, because like a lot of people have tried different collaborative public art projects, right? Like I think this is something that actually happens quite often, whether that be like a collaborative mural, which like that represents community, or you've seen those where it's like they put together faces of people's pictures and it creates like this gigantic one. I think
Yeah.
those are really cool. But what I like about that is like how it allows people to be represented
Mm.
in the art, right? And I think that's what you're getting at too, is like how do we allow people to be represented in the art?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, be represented, and I think, like, have their own touch, have their own, like, markings, if it was, like, I don't know, like, if you think, like, Jackson Pollock, like, he would leave, like, a cigarette butt on his painting. It's like, how do people leave their own impression, not just in a sense of, like, I did this one piece, but, like, seeing themselves in it in a way that is, like, a unique impression to be like, "Oh, okay, like, that was made by me, and this like, that part of this was made by this person," and, like, 'cause not to be, I guess, maybe this is me being critical of public art. Sometimes I find, like, it can be very like, it almost, and maybe it doesn't exist out of this space, but it is very, like, community mural, or sometimes it's, like, making art side by side and then putting it together, where it's like, how do we all just create something all at once? And maybe, like, I think we had talked about this before, but, like, yeah, how do you get everybody to work on something without and it make it a cohesive being or thing
yeah.
all at once? And yeah, that's still something that I've been pondering, and I think that is where it needs to be done in experimentation. Like, it's not gonna come to me by myself, because 'cause I'm just one person. I am not
Yeah.
the multiple minds that I yeah.
Well, okay, if we wanna get a little bit deeper into this, there's also the aspect of ego, right? And people are going to always be kind of at different stages of their relationship with themselves and their ego, right? And so there are going to be people who want to have the name out for themselves.
Mhm.
And I think that's a natural part of humanity.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I think there's space for that. So what comes to mind when I'm thinking about this? Because it's like, how we have it all be happening all at once and it be a creative process and allow for people to kind of be where they're at with it in the process? Because some
Yeah.
people are going to want to connect and some people are going to want to show off, right?
Mhm.
So I think about like dance ciphers where, you have a circle and you have kind of dancers on the outside making the circle, and then you have the person in the middle sharing their expression.
Mm.
And you can choose to go in that circle in various ways. If you're really feeling insecure and you go in the circle, you might, and you don't know too much about the art or anything like that, you might just be dancing the like three moves that you know.
Mhm.
But it's kind of like like that's a beginner's practice too, is to go into an uncomfortable space, kind of practice what you've learned and like be okay with the uncomfortability and just practicing being seen and expressing yourself.
Mm.
Then, like, there may be the people who go into the circle and they wanna prove themselves. Maybe
Mhm.
they have, like, a certain level of mastery or they haven't gotten that recognition, and, all they want to do, they don't want to be danced with. They want to dance at people. Right. And I feel like that's, that is a lot of like trying to assert yourself in a way, right? Like, this is my art. This is how I want to be seen. And like I said, I think there is a space for that. There are statements that need to be made. And sometimes it is about also transmuting pain. And then, you could go into the circle and you may want to connect. That's your community space. And so you go into the circle and you're doing your thing and you're expressing, but then you make eye contact with someone else and then you exchange and you move with them and you bring them into the circle and they feel empowered then to like take it on. And that's spreading the love in that sense.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was my train of thought based on my
Yeah.
experience of like how I've seen this like mobile art go down.
Yeah. Yeah, no, because I've definitely been a part of those. I didn't know what they were called, but hearing you describe it made me think of it like in I guess, a more objective way that I never thought about before, and like the different kinds of dancers and different selves and different kind of spaces in our own journeys of like whether it's like your healing, but also age and wisdom and all that, and definitely. But I think it also reminded me, it's like what is the intention behind somebody dancing, or but you might not even know what your intention is. Like you might go in, because I'm like, I've definitely been that person that like, I've been all of that. I've been, like, the scared, I don't wanna do this, but I've been the one that, like, you go and I'm like, "I want everyone to look at me. Like, I'm the best here." Like, I've had that energy, but I've also had the energy of, like, "No, this is fun. Like, I want people to join me." But they were I don't know if they were ever I didn't consciously make a choice. It was just kind of where I was creating in that moment, which, like you said, like, there's a time and a place for all of them, because if that's where you're at, that's where you're at. Like, you can't argue with the fact of it that is if that's where you're at, that is what it's meant to be, and that's where you're meant to create from, because yeah, that's the space you're in.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting to think, well, like maybe it's in creating spaces of more community or connection, that intention should be established at its core of, you know, we're going into this with this mindset. Like, this is what we're all collectively choosing to create. And having that maybe as the tether would change then that next, yeah, would change how people interact with whatever that art form it is that you're choosing to create, whether it be the dance circle or, I don't know, creating a visual art piece. But like having that intention set and like agreed upon. And then maybe you do sway from it a little bit, but then you remember, oh no, I decided that I want to be here for community. And I declared to everybody that I'm with that it's not just for me, it's for us and it's for connection. And then that is the point when maybe it aligns maybe everyone on that same point of connection. And it would be a choice. So maybe you are in more your ego, but it's like you have to call yourself out a little bit and be like, oh no, it's not for just me. It's here. I want to be here because I want to feel the energy of people. I want to get this, yeah, get that connection rather than stay in your individualism.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Let's tie it into what we were talking about earlier with the definition of community and how that's
Mhm.
kind of changed and how sometimes it's somewhat misrepresented in, you know, today's world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in this other podcast called Ologies with Ali Ward, she had an episode, and I'm forgetting how to say the word etymology, I think.
It was etymology. Yes.
Etymology.
Yeah.
So, basically, like, the history of words, and the guest was specifically talking about community and how community it's been co-opted over the years to include so many different things which aren't actually what a community is. Like the LGBT community. Not that it isn't a group of people that have like same values and things, but it the LGBT community or any community, it's like global, it's worldwide, it's hundreds of thousands, probably millions and millions, billions of people. But a community, she talks about how a community is really, I guess the other way that it's been changed is like we talk about communities in like business where it's like, oh, I want you to be a part of my community, but to be a part of the community, you have to pay a fee or you have to be a certain kind of person or like there's, I guess, criteria that you have to meet in order to be part of that community. And therefore, because there's this criteria and like selection, that therefore then it isn't a community because community should be just like a place where anybody can fit in and belong and participate. And I guess if I remember, I guess what I kind of took that to mean for myself, like like the meaning of community to me then is like, well, community should be about like connecting people and like helping those around you just like almost just because and like it is something that almost happens naturally and maybe it's been changed and used now in different ways because we've moved away from it like in
Yeah.
certain situations. Like I can definitely think when I'm like, okay, what communities am I part of? Like I do, I attend my local library, but I don't I don't know anyone by name. I like there's digital checkout now, which is crazy. So, like, you've lost, like, the little local grocery store or, like, these spaces where you would or I guess third spaces, that probably is part of this too. So, yeah, the meaning has evolved and changed over time, and I think then it's hard to, like, think about it because it's like, well, yeah, should, like, money be a part of it? Like, shouldn't community just be a community? Like, why do we have to build it? Should it not already just be there? Or like is it already there? We just have to like, take the wool from our eyes to see
Yeah.
it sort of thing? Yeah.
Those are all really great points. And I don't have answers. I would love to hear if anyone out there in the audience like has thoughts on this. I'd also love to hear them. Well, because discourse is also part of community, right? We can't just
Yeah.
consume, right? Anyway, this idea that like community should just be a naturally occurring thing that, is open to everyone. I think because of the way that our society has evolved, it's just a little bit out of grasp.
Yeah. We've almost eliminated it
Yeah.
kind of. And maybe like the fact that it's been eliminated has been like maybe not I won't say completely eliminated, but like it's been dispersed or I can't think of the word, but it does like then therefore, like, it is a natural occurring thing. Like, it wasn't I mean, was it intentional? I guess you'd think of, like, what are the causes that led it to us be have less community structure? And then I just think of, like, white supremacy and,
Yeah.
uh, you know, my mind's blanking right now, but colonization, and I'm
Mhm.
like, "Oh, well, that maybe that's probably the answer." You could go into it that way in some form.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of the commodification of community that we're
Yeah,
so and even, because I participate in the system
yeah.
as a coach who
Mm.
essentially builds quote unquote communities. I think I would rather call them growth groups because they're selective, right? Like you're choosing people to grow with. It's a little bit different. But even like a platform like Kajabi, right? One of their products is called community.
Wait,
I'm a
what is
Kajabi user.
Kajabi?
So Kajabi is a platform for content creators and coaches
Okay.
to build their businesses. And, so one of the products that you can sell is community, right?
Yeah.
So which, it is what it is. But basically it's creating a space for people who are your clients to come together and interact and share ideas,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So my observation with this is that it can feel like pulling teeth a little bit. I think, and the reason for this is because like it's hard to commune with people that you don't already relate with.
Mhm. Yeah. There's yeah, maybe the common ground is that you join, but what is the other common ground? And, like, there isn't that natural occurrence of relationship building. You don't cross paths with them physically every day or, like, cohabit the same spaces. Like, when I think of like, because then in my set, I'm like, I was trying to think of like what communities I've been a part of, and sometimes like some of the communities like that I thought of, like when we did that, like the Belong Institute masterclass, I remember I think they asked like, think of what communities you had been a part of. And the one that I thought of was like a summer camp I used to go to, and I felt so much joy there, but I'm like, "Oh, but it was paid." Like my parents paid for me to be there. And then like, well, then public school, that was a free place, but then, well, maybe not
Everybody's
exactly
paying
free
for it.
with the taxes, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, that was also created." Then I'm like, "What really community spaces have I been around?" And I'm like, "I don't know if I can think of maybe the kids on my street," but even then it was still just playing games outside. I know that's kind of sidetracked a little bit, but I've been trying to think. I'm like, what communities have I actually really been a part of that I imagine are when I'm saying community is?
Or maybe
Um,
there is a mix up in the need for it to not have money exchange, right? Because at the end of the day, money is a resource of energy.
yeah.
So there needs to be energy exchange, right?
Yeah.
And it could be time, it could be attention, it could be money or whatever other resource that we have. But maybe she's getting at something else that we're not quite grasping yet. And I will probably have to take some time to think about.
Yeah. Even
Yeah.
I guess too what I'm thinking now, especially when we are creating communities where it's like you have to pay up to be a part of it. I have noticed since COVID happened, I've been a part of like some, more online things. And it's interesting to see how like some are more successful than others and some they start off really strong. And she actually Radham mentioned this in she mentioned that, oh, to be like in a community, you have to like over time it will dwindle. Like, usually it's very strong at the beginning because people have they've got the spark of like, "Wow, this is great." Like, other people are interested in the same thing I am, and, like, there's this grasp that comes to it. And then over time, that kind of initial spark fades,
Mhm.
and that's when you really have to figure out how to, like, maintain it without burning yourself out. And another thing that she had mentioned in her classes was that and I think it was in the masterclass, but it was you need to be an active participant and to be a part of community. And so now when I like in doing her course and doing this other course that I'm doing for it's called Minecraft. It's like the neuroscience of manifestation. But I'm like, no, if I want to feel a part of this, I'm going to message this many people because I know that that's what I wanna get out of it,
Yeah.
but I can see that not everybody is on the same page. So what you had said previously around you, like, it was I forget what exactly you said, but you said it was kind of, like, difficult to bring
Oh,
everybody
yeah.
together. Yeah, because there isn't, like, this shared connection. It's almost like you need to, like people need to be told, like, "Hey, we're building community. If you wanna be a part of this, like, you need to do X, Y, and Z things to actually feel like you are gonna be a part of it."
Yeah.
Because it doesn't just happen, it has to be an active choice. And maybe before that active choice used to be like, "Okay, well, I need to eat, so I'm gonna go to my grocery store
Yeah.
and, I'm gonna see the same 10 people throughout the week because we live in a small space or small community." But now it's, well, I have to actively choose, like, I'm gonna show up and be a participant and, like, change that narrative because I definitely see, like, you'll sign up for a course and then, it's worth quite a bit of money and then only, maybe there's 130 people in it, but only 80 people show up to the calls and only 25 people write in the chat. But it's like it has to become a choice, and if you don't know that it's supposed to be a choice, then
Mhm.
you might not even be aware that you aren't participating even though you paid to be there in
Yeah.
the first place.
Oh, that's such a good point. I think that you've hit it on the head. Like it's choice. And it has to be
Yeah,
something that is so worth you being consistently present all the time because that's the only way that you will be a part of it. If it's not if you are not present to the value of it, it's so easy to check out because we check out all the time in life. And I think for me, at least running Club Phoenix, it's so worth it for me to work on myself and discover who I am that I'm going to keep doing that And I can show up for my people because like will always have something to say about that every single day. Right. And, when I was heavily steeped in dance community, I was there every day because I wanted to grow, because I wanted to move and I wanted to meet people. And when I stopped wanting to do that, then I stopped being part of the community, right? Like, but I can always be back in it as part of the community if that motivation is there for me to go back in it. And I've had that experience recently.
Yeah,
But
that
it's like, is it worth it right now it has to be worth it for you to do this and be present with it.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I guess also too, because it like in a way like we are having to like manufacture these spaces, like maybe we needed to take a step back and think about, okay, well, maybe this is all happening in, a shorter timeline than it actually takes to grow and to like have what a community is, where maybe there is less choice that has to be done and it just can become a part of how we exist and how we live. And it's almost like being so far taken away from it, realizing that we're missing it. Now it's going to take a bit to get back to where it just becomes like the regular cadence in our lives. And so it's also like there's a time element that, especially like I know we've been trained with this instant gratification, like things have to happen now, now, now. But community is something that it doesn't happen in, a one-time payment. It happens over like months, years, decades, like generations.
Yeah.
And it's not so like finite. Like it is just something that has to be built and cultivated for its longevity. And like I guess like it's just gonna take time to like really build more community in our world.
Yeah. And I think also this has to do with energy management and
Mm,
dealing with burnout. And I think the more that we are connected to our devices and using them for dopamine hits, the
yeah,
more we are susceptible to burnout. And that makes it hard for us to be present
yeah.
and want to be in community.
And I think like even like having that, recognizing that it's like a something to manage, like that dopamine hit from social media. And this idea that came to me when kind of like, so I remember I took one course in university and it was a community development course, and in it our professor talked about energy in the form of, he's like, if you could, because his thing was like, just eat like one thing that can help the planet is you don't have to be a vegan, but just eat less meat. And he would be like, he would equate everything, and I don't know why the meat thing stuck in my mind, but he would equate everything to be like riding a bike. He's like, well, if you were to produce this much, beef, you would have to ride a bike for 4 hours. Or if you were to have this much energy, you would have to ride a bike for 8 hours. If you were to, like power your computer for a day, you'd have to, this is how much energy you'd have to exert. And I think it's interesting to like when, because we're over consuming and we're burning ourselves out like mentally and physically. We're burning our resources out mentally and physically, or they're not mental and physical, the physically, maybe spiritually. It's like, well, of course we're burning out and we're burning, like we're over-consuming and like pollution and climate change because it's happening at a rate that we actually can't keep up with. I can easily plug in my computer, but if I were to actually put in the man hours to like put the energy of my life, like it would take so much longer. So we try and like do so much, but we actually are like we're like way overachieving. We're like
Yeah.
trying to do way too many things that like we physically like really can't do without like energy that we are, extracting at a rate that like is way too fast, like unsustainable. Um,
Yeah. And
yeah.
those are big questions with solutions that I think people are trying to find, but it's not going to happen overnight. So
Yeah. Yeah, we could I think that that's a whole, it's a whole 'nother conversation about sustainability, and I do think, like, I truly think it is all interconnected, like,
yeah.
it isn't just one conversation, but it is all connected, and I do think, like, I think there is so much hope, and I think humans, that we're resilient, and I think we will change, and, like, we will solve, like, issues that we're dealing with, but I just yeah, I think it will take time and a lot of more time than we think, I guess. And just, like, the faith that we'll figure it out, that we're resilient.
So I'll say one more piece on the communities and kind of the movement to build them with money. And that is, I think that this is something that people are doing because they're seeing that people are squandering their attention,
Mm.
and money is a resource that can be bought that may redirect some of their attention.
Mm,
And so I definitely am on board with just like the whole idea of having skin in the game, right? Because
mhm.
you're going to invest no matter what. It is
Yeah.
like really being conscious of what you're investing in.
Mm,
Is okay, let's just say, let's take the average person. They're putting all of their time and attention investment into their social media,
mhm.
a lot of it. And what it may take, because that's addicting, right? What it may take for them to not do that is to realize there's a problem and pay someone else to divert their attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to have that, like, support, because yeah, when you're changing any behavior, any addictive behavior, like, when I was getting sober, it's like I did not do it alone, like, I needed other people, and you need other community is exactly that, is that piece of, like, having that support. But I really liked what you said about, like, just thinking about money, almost like it's reminding me, it's like we need to change our mindset about it, see it as energy, it's an exchange, and that it can be used in so many great ways, and just have a reform it in a different context to be like, it can do so much good, especially when it's intentional, like the intent behind it, that choice and the curiosity that you're seeking out that choice with is for, like, the betterment of yourself and hopefully the others around you and, like, the world in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one day we may get to a point where the demands on our energy are not so great, right? I think that and at that point, we can start to change the way that we allocate our resources. I
Mhm.
think it's going to be a lot of work to get up to that point.
Yeah, to change the demands on our energy. I really
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, it reminded me, there's a book called Rest is Resistance. Really, really good book, but it's all about basically how just, like, taking time for rest is making that change, is fighting against the treadmill and the machine, but also recognizing, like, yeah, we are a part of it. Like, we need to work with it, but we also need to make those incremental steps in the way that we want to, like, conserve and use our own energy. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel this on a very personal level because one of the people that I was talking to in my local community earlier, he was asking me about my work, with coaching and everything. Is like, are you okay? Are you like emotional? It's like my job to me is to ensure that the amount of time that I'm giving to my clients each week is buffered with so much rest and self-care so that I show up with resilience. I show up with the ability to create the container that my people need to heal. Right.
Mm,
And so realizing that is like, I spend a lot of time resting. I
mm,
spend a lot of my time cooking healthy food, making sure I go to bed on time, right? I spend a lot of time by myself, but it is for this purpose. And by doing so, I am reallocating my resources. I am spending less money, but I'm also like not in the world doing so much crazy stuff
yeah.
and wasting a lot of my time on things that I don't need to be. And so yeah, I think
Yeah.
it
Well,
takes so
I
much
think
intention.
yeah, and it you definitely have a lot of intention, but, like, even I think too, like, what I think is important that you're doing is like you're taking care of yourself so you can hold space for others to like see that and take care of themselves. And like that is like that chain reaction where then they can open up that space and they can like literally get your energy to then, you know, get the healing that they need, which ultimately what's that saying? Like, you know, heal yourself and you change the world kind of thing. And I truly believe that is how we make change and heal ourselves, but our communities is by looking like seeing how you need to realign in your intentions so that can influence the others around you too.
Yeah. So that's an amazing takeaway for today. Yeah, take the time. Take the time to really put yourself first. Because by doing that, like, yeah, you are creating the container for others to heal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else you want to mention today before we end our session?
I don't think so. So, what should I say? Nothing that comes off the top of my head. I think we had a really well-rounded conversation. I guess if you wanna connect with me, you know, Valerie will share my links.
Yes. Oh, and I'll show you this after, but and for all the audience here, I've been thinking about, well, I've been creating all these podcasts with amazing people having great conversations, and then they just go off and to do their own thing.
Mm.
And I would love to create more connection between guests and listeners and like continue the dialogue. Again, because this is not about consumption of media. This is about listening to ideas and putting them into action. So I am going to be coming out with a platform soon for all of us to do that. And
I love that.
yeah, so
Keep the discourse going.
yeah. All
I love
right.
that.
Thank you, Catherine, for being on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved our conversation. It was so fun.
Hey, listeners, if you're enjoying the stories and insights from the Ashes, why not stay connected with our community? Join my mailing list for bi-weekly updates on upcoming events, wellness tips, fun tidbits, and of course, new podcast episodes. I promise no spam, just valuable content to help you live your best life. Head over to www.intrepidwellness.life and sign up today. Don't miss out, and let's keep the conversation going.